Okay, I don't get this question that often, but I think it's kind of important. Uh, what was the most important animal to the Native Americans in North America? Okay, now the first instinctive reaction would be bison, right? But I think that wasn't the most important animal. All right, I think, in my opinion, the most important animal was the white-tailed deer, or members of the deer family like elk and mule deer. Okay, but the deer family, I think, was the most important from the very beginning, uh, as they moved down into warmer climates. I think perhaps in the beginning it was mammoth and caribou, but as they moved south, it became deer. Okay, now of course there were numerous bison, and there were, I think, cultures that focused specifically on bison hunting. I think that was done. But even with Clovis and other paleo peoples, if you look at their camps and the fauna that were slaughtered, you'd find not only bison but deer. In some cases, most of the remains are deer or some sort of animal like maybe bighorn sheep or wild horses or something like that, something other than bison. Even with bison focused cultures, you would see more bones from deer and similar animals than you would with bison or mammoth. Okay, so I think the white-tailed deer was most important. Of course, that's just my opinion. There are a few reasons why. I mean, whitetail has extremely useful antler, and the bones are easy to work. I mean, I've worked deer bones compared to elk and cow bones. The cow is very similar to bison, and the deer is by far the easiest to work for some reason. It's more brittle, but you can sand them down and shape them easier. Okay. Um, so I've also heard that it requires 5 deer per year to supply one person with clothing for a year as a minimum. And that includes children. So if you have a village of 500 to 1,000 people, that's a lot of deer every year. So you would have to focus a lot of your effort on clearing or burning areas for deer to graze. You would have to go out and control predators, because the fawns are so vulnerable during the fawning season. And same with hunters from other tribes, have to be controlled or pushed out so that these deer herds could multiply. Now, we don't see a lot of deer. Well, we're starting to, but we don't see a lot of deer these days. One of the reasons is because during the settlement of the New World by Europeans, it was kind of like a free-for-all as far as hunting goes, and I think 90% of all the deer and all the bison were wiped out for use for their hides and for their meat in the beginning, until we started to use land management techniques and laws to preserve bison and deer. But in my opinion, I think there were huge herds of deer, and these were very close to human contact, had a very close contact with humans, and humans would actually modify the environment to make it beneficial for deer to reproduce in large numbers without predators, and under strict management by the tribes. Okay, and I think they would fight each other for lands that were prime real estate for deer and that sort of animal. Okay, so going with that idea, I think the males were tasked with going out and killing all the predators and driving away other hunters from other tribes. So that was their job. And the females would process the hides and meat. Okay. Now, I think predator hunting can also yield meat and hides, and I think the males were primarily consuming those meats and the hides. You know, you can eat all kinds of animals, of course. You can eat whatever you kill, bear especially, but also coyote and wolf and fox and anything that would prey on the deer you could also eat. So I think that was very common as far as gender roles. The men would be protecting the herds and the women would be processing the products from the deer themselves. And I think the tools bear that out on many of these sites. The hide scraping tools, in my opinion, they were mainly made by women, and the hunting tools were made by men. Of course, they get mixed in the camps, but I think you can tell the difference in both mentality and technique in making these separate lithic tools. All right, the processing tools of meat and hide processing, and the hunting and killing tools. Okay, so I think that's how it was back in the day. There's also the question of fishing. How important was fishing? Now, as far as I can tell in the literature, fishing was mostly seasonal during spawning times in all areas of the country. So you wouldn't spend a lot of time fishing during a non-spawning time of the year. And I think there is actually evidence of seasonal migrations specifically for spawning times, especially along the coastlines of fish species. And there were techniques on how to net and catch fish without projectiles. You know what I mean? You would be able to catch these fish either by hand or by spear or something that was not a projectile. So I don't think bows and arrows and atlatl darts were used very often for fishing per se, okay, especially during spawning events. I think that the atlatls and bows and arrows and stuff like that were used off-season opportunistically. Okay, I could be wrong about that. I mean, of course, there's other aquatic animals like alligators and beaver and all kind of stuff that could be shot at any time with projectiles, and I think that was the case. But as far as fishing goes, I think it was very important, especially along coastlines and along major rivers where fish would come in for spawning. In other areas of the country, I've heard strange stories like some tribes did not want to eat fish because it was bad luck or something. Same with reptiles and snakes. Sometimes the tribes would consider those types of foods taboo, okay, and that kind of thing. Shellfish was also important seasonally, and there's huge middens of shells in certain areas along the coast. Texas, I know for sure. I think it's the same thing in California. So shellfish, but you can also find shellfish within rivers. I think that was utilized, but it was. I think the shellfish in particular was a woman type of activity where they would gather that type of food because it wasn't very dangerous, not like hunting an alligator. Okay, so there was a division there as far as tasks and tools. Okay. Another question that's a little bit off topic, but the question of seawater. How were Native Americans able to consume seawater while they were at the shore, because there wasn't very much fresh water, as far as I could tell, available while camped at the shorelines. You would have to be traveling inland to get your water unless there was a mountain source or something with the fresh water flow into the ocean right where you're camped. And I don't think that was very common. So I've done some research on seawater, and it turns out that you can consume seawater on a daily basis as long as it's diluted with some fresh water. So the ratio is 2 parts seawater to 1 part fresh water, and you can consume that on a daily basis for weeks or months and you'd be fine. Okay, so that's how I think they survived during those particular seasonal hunts on the shorelines. Okay, I think that's it. There's also migrations, deer migrations and bison migrations and all that kind of stuff, but I think that was that's a specialized cultural adaptation to follow seasonal migrations of animals. I think most of the Native Americans were semi-nomadic, which means that they had settlements in different areas within their territory at different times of the year. So it wasn't a broad area of wanderings. It was kind of a limited area, but camps would be taken down and built according to the different seasons. Okay, that's it.